Welcome to Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today we're going to be talking about 20 hidden gem movies currently included with Prime Video that you have probably missed. I'm your host, Darren Van Dam, and today we're going to be talking about 20 amazing movies included with Prime Video that you likely have not seen. 10 of these are movies I have never, ever talked about on the channel before. But if you're new here, please consider clicking that subscribe button and the little bell icon. That way you get notified when videos like this release so you don't miss the movies before they're gone from the respective streaming platforms. We're going to start this list off pretty strong. Keep in mind, we're all the way at the back at number 20, and we're starting with a movie called Centurion. This stars Michael Fassbender and is actually from the director of The Descent. So it's a fairly bloody movie, but it's not nearly as creepy. This is about some Roman soldiers that get separated from their group and get trapped behind enemy lines. It's wild, it's violent, it's pretty intense. Michael Fassbender is great, and there's a really great supporting cast in this as well. In fact, this movie has a lot going for it. It's got a lot of really great qualities. It's just shy of being really good though, which is why it's all the way back at 20. But if you like these types of movies, you like the setting, you're a big fan of Michael Fassbender, this one's gonna be a must-watch for you. Now, while that was a fairly serious movie, my next one is not. The Baytown Outlaws stars Eva Longoria, Billy Bob Thornton, and is kind of a grungy, almost a grindhouse wannabe type of a thing. This is more of a straight-to-video type movie, but in that category, this one is quite good. There's some really interesting, fun characters. And that's the big thing with this one. This movie does not forget to be fun and to have a good time. If you like these types of movies and you're able to overlook some of the weaker elements in something like this, then this is a fun watch that I know a lot of you will enjoy. Just don't have high expectations for it. Now we're going to switch gears in a big way because my next pick is a more serious and somber indie flick starring Ben Foster called Leave No Trace. In this movie, he and his teenage daughter are trying to live off the grid. They're living out in the forest, and this is set in modern day. It's not a post-apocalyptic thing or anything like that. They're just trying to live off the grid, and the movie does quite a few things. It shows how people go about doing that. It also shows how that's not really allowed anymore in most parts of the country, but they also show you why they're trying to live that way. It's a very good movie. Ben Foster's great and everything. He's particularly good here. The young girl that plays his daughter does a great job as well, but keep in mind, this is a slower paced, more serious, and again, sort of a somber type movie, but it's beautifully shot and really well done. Just don't expect anything that you would call action in this one. But if that's not for you, I've got another serious, somewhat somber indie flick that does feature quite a few scenes of action. It's called JCVD, and those are the initials of Jean-Claude Van Damme.
The window didn't explode right. I'm 47 years old, and it's very difficult for me to do everything in one shot.
Now, this is one of the cooler projects he's done. Now, it's not the wildest, most fun movie he's done, but it's one of the more interesting ones. In this movie, he plays himself, and he's caught up in a real bank robbery. Now, in terms of action, this movie opens up with a long single-take action sequence because he's shooting a movie, but a lot of what this movie focuses on is that he's a regular guy and he's sort of aging and he's struggling with sort of his inability to be this action star in real life. So it's got some heavy themes to it. Nothing too heavy, but it is much more of a serious movie than you would expect from Jean-Claude Van Damme. It was a creative concept, and I think it was really well directed and it was delivered pretty well, but it does have a slow pace to it, especially for a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. But if you're a fan of his, I consider this to be a must-watch. Even if you're not, it really is an interesting indie flick. Another really interesting indie flick that I think I've only talked about once on the channel when it was on Netflix a couple of years ago. It's called White God. Not only is it far from what you would think, it's far from anything you've ever seen before. Most of this movie, you end up following the story of a stray dog. There's not much dialogue or anything like that. These dogs don't talk, but it's beautifully shot, even if it is a little sad and dark and gloomy at times. And there are people in the movie that do talk, so you do get some of the story that way, but something happens in the third act that is a wild. Now, this is one of those movies that I do not recommend for everyone, but if you can be patient and you like weirder, interesting indie flicks, White God certainly fits that bill. My next pick is also for people who like weird stuff, but who like weirder, darker stuff. This is one of the darker ones on this list. It's called Come to Daddy. This stars Elijah Wood as a young man who's trying to reconnect with his estranged father, played by Stephen McHattie, who does an incredible job in this movie. Don't get me wrong, Elijah Wood does a good job. He really carries the movie because he's on screen in almost every shot. But McHattie kills it. It's just one of his better performances. I always like him, but this is easily some of his best work. And then the thing I really dig about this movie is it's kind of two movies. You get this amazing, almost like a play, this performance piece where these two guys are sort of having this battle of wits with each other, and then there's a twist and the movie completely changes and turns into kind of this wild grindhouse thing. I loved it, but this is not for everyone. If you do like weird, dark stuff though, this is gonna be the pick for you. All right, one more weird one and then we'll move on to some more easily accessible ones, but the brass teapot will actually appeal to a fairly broad audience. In this movie, a young couple finds this brass teapot that gives them lots of money every time they're injured. And the story works out really well. I mean, if you just think about it for a minute, if you had something that would give you money every time you got hurt, what would you start to do? And the people in this movie do what a lot of us would start to do. They start punching themselves in the face and pulling their teeth out, and then it just continues to escalate. But again, as wild as that sounds and as kind of wacky as some of the scenes are, it does have a good story at its core. This is a good, solid movie, again, that will appeal to a broad audience, even if it is really bizarre. All right, now one that's a little more straight down the middle and features one of the best casts on this list with people like Robert Redford and James Gandolfini is The Last Castle. Now this movie is actually about a military prison that is ruled with an iron fist by James Gandolfini, and while it is slow paced and not the best prison movie, you got some amazing performances from some really great actors, and it is a good prison movie. But the fact that it's not great, I think, is why time is kind of forgotten this one. If you've never watched it though, or it's been a while, this is a good solid watch, maybe even in preparation for the Many Saints of Newark. I know Gandolfini obviously is not in it, but there will be a young Tony Soprano in it, so watching another Gandolfini movie can't hurt. Goon has got to be one of the best comedies, if not one of the best movies Sean William Scott has done since American Pie. In this movie, he plays a hockey player that is just down to brawl whenever. Liev Schreiber plays opposite him on another team. I would have never thought to put these two guys together in a movie, and they've got amazing chemistry with each other. They hate each other. There's a lot of violence in this movie, but it's all done in good fun. At the same time though, this isn't sort of a slapstick type movie. It does have some heavier, more serious themes, but it is a dark comedy through and through. It's got laughs in every single scene, and it's a good story. Sean William Scott even does maybe his best performance ever. He does a very good job playing this character. If you've never really been a fan of his, Goon might be the movie to win you over. And then finally, we will wrap up the bottom 10 on this list with one of the only horror movies on this list, The Taking of Deborah Logan. Now this one has grown an audience over time. It's more popular now than it ever has been, but a lot of people have still not discovered this one. Now, this one does start off with a very slow pace. It's about a documentary crew filming a woman who's going through the early stages of dementia, and it slowly develops into a true blue horror movie. This one really goes deep once it gets there. It is a little grim and upsetting, even though there's not much going on in the way of horror early on in this movie. It still held my interest really well, and it did a great job of setting up everything that was going to come later on. You just have to be patient with it, but the payoff is worth the wait on this one. If it's been a while since you've seen a good horror movie, this one, for a found footage movie, is top-notch stuff. Now, speaking of top-notch stuff, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, EKSTER wallets. This is my wallet that I carry with me everywhere. It's not really a wallet as much as it is a card carrier. Super easy to use, cards pop right out, they pop right back in, and this metal offers RFID protection, so identity theft becomes a problem for thieves. In case you didn't know that people can scan your back pocket and get your information off your cards, this protects against that. And they come in a wide variety of colors, different leathers and styles, and I highly recommend you get the upgraded tracker card. It's well worth it. You just use the app that comes with it, you push this button, and your wallet keeps ringing until you find it. And what's even cooler is I lose my phone way more than I lose my wallet around the house. I can just go get my wallet, there's a little button on this thing, you push it twice, and my phone starts ringing, and I can find it. It's gonna ring until I find it. And there's no batteries or anything. You see that little rectangle? It's a solar panel. You put this outside for a little bit and it recharges it. It's easily the coolest wallet I've ever had. It's light, it's small, I can barely tell it's in my pocket, but it's super convenient. Right now, my viewers can go to the link in the description and save 5% off on top of any additional sales they have going on right now. I highly recommend it. Go to the link in the description, get yours, but let's move on with the rest of this list.
Okay, I am here as one of the more senior D-jocks at this station. We're going to talk about jobs. A Nazi officer, this, isn't it? Should snap my heels together here. Achtung!
Guten Tag.
Silence! Sorry.
Now it's time for one of the only comedies on this list, Alan Partridge. Now this stars Steve Coogan, who's a big star over in the UK. He's always got some sort of show or something going on. And this Alan Partridge character is a character he's done multiple times, but this movie stands alone on its own, and I think is one of his funniest performances. In this movie, he plays a radio host that is way too full of himself, and the radio station he works at is taken under siege by a disgruntled worker, and he does a horrible job of trying to fix the situation. It's just a laugh a minute. If you like Steve Coogan and his type of humor, it's hard to do much better than Alan Partridge. I will say though, it is cringe humor, so if that's not for you, this is not gonna be your movie. Now, I said I didn't have much in the way of horror on this list, but I do have another one called Daniel Isn't Real. This is one that had been on Shudder for about a year or so, and I did recommend it to my channel members. But in this movie, a young man who used to have an imaginary friend named Daniel starts to see this imaginary friend again, and the imaginary friend is actually played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, and yes, that is Arnold Schwarzenegger's son, and it's a wild role for him. This is really kind of a cool flick. It's a little psychedelic at times, it's really creepy at times, and can be pretty graphic. It's extremely dark, but it's got this really cool edge to it and has a concept that's very different from anything I've seen in a movie like this. If the concept interests you, the look of it, the sort of psychedelic, trippy nature of it, and if you really like dark horror movies, this is a great pick that has been overlooked over the last year or so. Now, a movie that's a mixed bag with sort of some mixed performances and a lot of good qualities with some not so good ones, that comes out ahead in the end, is Lords of Dogtown. Now this is about the group of kids that essentially invented modern day skateboarding, and not only are most of the young actors in this movie doing a really good job sort of bringing this true story to the screen, you've also got a really great but small role from Heath Ledger shortly before he died. Speaking of people who died, Mitch Hedberg had a really small role in this. I believe he died before this movie was even released. If you're remotely interested in the skateboarding world, even if you don't do it, this is a cool flick. Even if you're not though, it's got a lot of good coming of age stuff, and it's just a real good, well-rounded movie. Again, it's got some weak elements, but the strong elements and entertainment factor really outweigh everything else with this one. Now, obviously Ben Stiller is most famous for his comedy movies, but he has done a handful of serious movies in his career. One of the first from the mid-90s is Permanent Midnight. Now, this movie is based on a book by the same name that was written by a screenwriter who had a very successful career writing for shows like Alf in the 80s, and he also had a very expensive heroin habit. So in this movie, Ben Stiller surprisingly plays a heroin addict. But you've also got some great performances from Elizabeth Hurley and Owen Wilson. And it's very different from other heroin movies. This is a functioning heroin addict. This is a guy who has a major career and he cannot stop shooting up. It's very sad and upsetting, but it's also a unique lens to look at addiction through. It's fairly different from movies like Trainspotting and things like that. If you're a fan of Ben Stiller's in any kind of way, this is a must watch. You need to see him do this type of work. It's not necessarily surprising that he can do it, but a lot of people miss this one, and it's just a good gem from the 90s, one of the better drug movies to come out of that decade. Easily the oldest movie on this list is Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. This is basically a heist movie starring Clint Eastwood and a very young Jeff Bridges. This is a cool 70s flick. Not only do you get a great heist sequence towards the end of the movie, but there's all sorts of wacky stuff going on in this movie, including a trunk full of white rabbits. I'm talking weird, wild, crazy 70s stuff, and it works. Mainly because you've got such great performances from Eastwood and Bridges, and Jeff Bridges spends maybe a quarter of the movie in a dress, and while it is silly, it's not overly silly. It works for the type of heist that they're doing, so it's funny but not stupid. If you find yourself in the mood for a good 70s heist flick, it's gonna be hard to do much better than Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, especially if you've never seen it. Now, in typical Darren Van Dam fashion, I've got a couple more weird ones, and then we're gonna close out with two killer drama, thriller type things. But one of the weirder ones is Hobo with a Shotgun. Now, if that title intrigues you, just watch the movie. This is a cool flick, but fair warning, it is extremely graphic. In this movie, Rutger Hauer plays a hobo with a shotgun. This one's got some wild fantasy elements that sort of come out of left field at some point, but again, just gory, graphic, grungy stuff that actually does have a decent story underneath all of that grime. And obviously Rutger Hauer kills it in this role. This is a really badass role for him. Almost too badass at times. It really is that type of a movie. If you don't like harder, grungier stuff, do not watch this movie, but if you do, this is going to be the pick for you off of this list. If you enjoyed The Suicide Squad, or really any James Gunn movies, and you've never seen Slither, that's going to be the pick off of this list for you. This is one of the early big budget movies that he did after his Trauma movies, and it's got a great cast with Nathan Fillion, Michael Rooker, and Elizabeth Banks. In this movie, these little slug type alien movies start taking over a small town. Again, gory, gross, but this one is just a lot of fun in typical James Gunn style. Every single scene has some jokes in it. They are dark. This one is gross and really gross at times, but different than Hobo with a Shotgun. Hobo with a Shotgun is a lot of faces getting blown off. This one is a lot of just weird, slimy creatures all over the place. But it is a fun horror movie, even if it is extremely disgusting.
What is that?
Oh, negative. That's delicious.
Blood on a stick.
On a steak.
That's not bad.
Very refreshing, especially when you're in a hot spot.
All right, and then for the art film crowd, Only Lovers Left Alive is a vampire flick from director Jim Jarmusch. He's most famous for movies like Dead Man, Coffee and Cigarettes, and Broken Flowers, all movies I recommend, but Only Lovers Left Alive is maybe his most accessible. Now, his style is fairly slow-paced, and there's not too much in the way of story with a movie like this, but you do spend a lot of time with some very interesting characters. Tilda Swinton and Tom Hiddleston play these two vampires who are in love. They're both really rich characters. And then you've got great supporting characters from Anton Yelchin, Jeffrey Wright, and John Hurt. It's got a good look to it, an interesting style, interesting soundtrack. Because it is Jim Jarmusch, don't expect a typical story arc or anything like that. But again, my art film lovers, if you've never seen this one, it is a top-notch pick, which is why I've got it ranked so high, even though it's not for everybody. Now, one from Australia that is only a few years old that got criminally overlooked is Goldstone. This is just a classic thriller that takes place in the outback. There is some sex trafficking involved in the story, so while there's not anything on screen that's going to be too upsetting, some of the themes can be pretty upsetting, but that's what drives this story. This story follows a detective investigating a missing person, and he steps into a rabbit hole that just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. This one's got a great shootout sequence. The cinematography is great, largely because they're in these amazing landscapes out in Australia, but a good solid story that should appeal to most people watching if the sex trafficking stuff doesn't put you off too much. But if you clicked on this video hoping to find just a good solid movie that you've never seen or heard of, this is going to be one of the better bets for you. And then finally, we will wrap up with a movie from one of my favorite directors, Michael Mann, in a movie that I think is some of his best work, but that time has forgotten. I'm talking about The Insider. Now, when this was released, it was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards. Russell Crowe gives one of his best performances in it. I even forget sometimes that it's him, but in this movie he plays Jeffrey Wigand, a famous whistleblower for the tobacco companies. Now, at the time that he spoke up, we already knew cigarettes were dangerous, but he let us know that the cigarette companies knew how dangerous they were and that they were essentially just a delivery device for nicotine, which keeps you addicted. His family was threatened, there was a big court case, they were trying to protect him, he wasn't sure if he wanted to do it or not. There's a lot of drama in this one. Al Pacino gives an amazing performance. He's playing Lowell Bergman, who worked for 60 Minutes, who was trying to get this guy to speak up. It is beautifully shot, amazing cinematography. As usual with Michael Mann, an incredible soundtrack on this one. It is just a wonderful movie. If you've never seen it, I consider it to be one of the best dramas of its kind. Definitely check it out. It is a top tier Darren Van Dam pick. But if those 20 recommendations are not enough for you, or maybe you want some recommendations on some other streaming platforms like Netflix, Hulu, Tubi, HBO Max, I do other videos. Check out some of my more recent uploads on the channel. I'll put links in the top pinned comment down below, along with the full list of all the movies I just discussed. You can scroll down there, take a screen grab, maybe use your phone to highlight the ones you want, and then you've got a list of movies that are available on Prime Video whenever you want to watch a movie again. Help me thank the Patreon supporters in those comments down below. If you are interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, there's a link in the video description. There's also a link in the description where you can become a channel member and get access to exclusive videos right here on YouTube, like my spoiler talk for The Suicide Squad, which just came out a couple of days before this video, but I will keep making videos like this one as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special Prime Video Hidden Gems list, and you will see me on the next one.